Hello once again from the Prim Reaper. This is the third and final, I promise, video in talking about the misuse of the word transphobia. There are just a few other topics that I wanted to discuss on this subject that I didn't get to yet, but I think that many of them are important things to talk about, not just about transphobia, but in general. I'm going to be honest, I'm running out of steam from all the work I'm doing right now, and as a result, my writing flow might take a bit of a hit in this video, so bear with me if things seem a little disjointed. First, because I have written the script out at this point and have not found a good place to shunt this little ditty in, I'm going to start off the video by addressing the transgenderism is a mental illness comments I so regularly see in talking about this. Now, first of all, calling this statement inherently transphobic automatically invites the question, are you implying that mental illness is a problem? Which is just food for thought for anyone who views it as important to normalize mental illness. But second of all, I think the statement is a simplification, but it is not necessarily a transphobic one. That is, gender dysphoria is the mental condition for which transitioning, and therefore the state of being transgender, is considered the current best practice treatment. Does that mean that I don't think the statement can be used in a hurtful way? Of course not. I see it used in a hurtful way all the time. I'm just trying to address the nature of the phrase itself. However, I also believe that there are people who do not use it in a hurtful way. For example, someone who might say, I believe transgenderism is a sign of mental illness and it is reckless to immediately jump to treating it with surgeries. Someone who says something like that is obviously not intending that statement from a hurtful place. Yet there are still those who will be offended by such a statement. I find this interesting myself. I think the offense usually comes from a place of feeling like one's identity is being dismissed, even though I don't think that's the intention. Personally, I wonder if someone were to create a pill tomorrow that magically eliminates gender dysphoria, would there be people who refuse to take it on account of such a thing being considered transphobic? I think that asking people such a question would provide interesting insight into whether one views their condition as a mental illness or merely as an identity, but I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole of philosophizing here. Let's continue. Before I go further with misuses, though, I thought it might be interesting to explore some of the proper uses of the word transphobia, just so it doesn't look like I'm trying to claim that the concept doesn't exist at all. I definitely believe it does. I just think that legitimate transphobia requires a deliberate general bias against or judgment of transgender people, and or a statement intended with the express purpose of attacking a transgender person's identity just to be mean. Let me give a few examples of what I believe would constitute legitimately transphobic statements. Trans women are just men who want to invade female spaces. Transgender people are just fetishizing the opposite sex. Transgender people are weirdos and they freak me out. And you're not a man or woman, you're just mentally ill. And cue the quote mining. See, other than the last one, which is a more pointed insult, these statements are making broad, sweeping, and particularly critical statements of transgender people, and to me it's much the same as making generalizations about the sexes or the races. However, let me provide a contrasting example that I do not believe is an example of transphobia. All trans people just want to invade female spaces is not equivalent to there are some cases where women can reasonably be expected to feel uncomfortable about transgender women, especially those who haven't transitioned in their spaces. And you know what? Most transgender people I know would even agree with such a statement. However, there are some people who are just taking things to such an extreme that they believe that anything but complete and utter acceptance of everything and anything to do with transgenderism constitutes transphobia. Which kind of bleeds into my next point. I have seen many general statements lately from transgender and non-binary individuals, let's be fair here, mostly the online radicalized segments, saying that others must respect their identity at all costs and in all ways. This may include demanding the use of special pronouns, demanding acceptance into certain opposite gender spaces such as female prisons or female sports, despite there being obvious negative side effects to such actions, or simply demanding that no one question anything about their lifestyle or any of the claims they may be making. But here's the thing though, Respect is not the same thing as capitulation. Sometimes respecting a friend may mean pointing out some of the bad behaviors they are engaging in and telling them to cut it out. Do I believe that this individual...
Excuse me, it's ma'am. It is ma'am.
Deserves respect just because they are demanding it? No. I believe they deserve to be chided and informed that throwing temper tantrums is something that most toddlers grow out of, and that they should go ahead and return when they learn how to behave like a grown-up and treat others the way they want to be treated. Here's what I believe instead. All people should be treated with kindness and respect in the sense of respecting one's basic human decency, as distinct from the concept of respect as holding someone in high esteem. I am the sort of person who strongly believes that people should be allowed to live as they please as long as they are not hurting anyone else, and if that involves being respectfully asked to use a certain set of identifiers to refer to a person, I will gladly do that for someone. But the moment someone begins demanding respect in any form, especially if they act like the example I provided, or if they start slinging insults at people who refuse to capitulate to their demands, that's when it's call-out time. Now, a semi-related example I have seen coming up is in the whole idea of identity. Let me try to explain. What I mean is, when someone comes to identify as a woman, some people are saying that this means they always were a woman, and to say otherwise is to disrespect their identity. I have a difficult time wrapping my head around why such a thing would be disrespectful, quite honestly. In my view, the whole point of transitioning to something else is because said individual originally belonged to a group that they didn't feel aligned with. Joseph, who transitioned into Josephine, is in a categorically different position than Josephine, who was born and always has been Josephine. That doesn't mean that one of these two Josephines is a better person than the other or anything like that, but merely that there is a difference between them. I don't want to linger on this subject because I feel I largely covered my thoughts on it in the first video discussing all this, but I just wanted to use it as an example of how people are making certain demands under the guise of respect and painting it as other people's problems if they don't agree. In my view, it is no more disrespectful to say that Josephine was not always a woman when she identified as Joseph than it is to say the sky is not always pink just because it was pink at sunrise. Like hate, I feel like disrespect involves a certain level of contempt that just isn't there in this kind of statement. I'm going to take this opportunity to kind of clumsily segue into a similar but different topic: the extent to which misgendering someone constitutes a traumatic experience or even straight up violence. Let's talk generally for a few moments. I rather dislike the idea of how common words like trauma and violence have become. Perhaps I'm just saying this as a person who has experienced many years of literal physical violence, and I know how terrifying it can be to deal with on a near daily basis. But the idea that words can be violent borders on the absurd to me, because I can't be slapped across the face with an expletive, bruised by an insult, or be lifted off the ground by the throat at the hands of a mean comment. This is not to say that words cannot be emotionally painful. Obviously, I can think of many examples of words that have left a lasting impact on me, but it's a very different sort of thing than violence. I think it's wrong to conflate the two just to make words seem more dire, especially when, in many cases related to transgender individuals, the verbal slights being made are often accidental and are readily corrected. I know my examples of accidental misgendering of individuals have resulted in far more, oh, it's actually X rather than Y, and far less,
It is ma'am.
And because these accidental slights are typically such non-incidents, it really makes me wonder the extent to which even more deliberate slights constitute actual trauma. Now, before getting out the pitchforks on that statement, let me try to explain, because what I am not saying is insults and mean comments are totally okay and you should use them freely, nor am I saying that verbal and emotional abuse cannot be traumatic, though I am saying it's not the same thing as violence. Let me begin with a personal example. When I was young, I was extremely masculine. Embarrassing. But a common way for me to be insulted was to be called a man, manly, that sort of thing. I dealt with it every day, And at the time, I was dealing with the aforementioned physical and emotional abuse at home, so I certainly wasn't going to reach out and ask for more help being more feminine there. Essentially, all I had to do was dress in what I had to dress and take what the other kids were going to dish out. Did it hurt? Yes, of course it did. It was embarrassing and uncomfortable, but was it a traumatic incident that hampered my daily functioning? Well, no, not really. And that's what I'm trying to get at by using this specific incident, because I did have many more examples of bullying that I could draw from as well. I was deliberately misgendered constantly in junior high school. And before anyone says anything, I know that it's not a perfect correlation because I wasn't initially a boy trying to transition into a girl. However, what I'm getting at is that people were directly attacking my identity in the same sort of way that a transgender person facing deliberate misgendering might be attacked. But what I am saying is that I question the extent to which I would call this sort of thing traumatic. When I think of trauma, and by no means am I saying that my view is the one true way, but hear me out, I think of being afraid to leave my room in the morning. I think of the morning when I was thrown around the living room while being screamed at and while trying to escape but being unable to, leaving me covered in purple bruises afterwards. The flurry of movement that was so frightening that it turned the experience into a terrifying blur. I do not think of the cliquey high school girls giggling and calling me a greasy man who smells. Trust me, this is all pretty embarrassing to share with you guys, but I'm just trying to illustrate my thought processes here. I know that people experience things differently, and that's why I'm frequently punctuating what I'm saying with disclaimers that I don't know everyone's experiences. But I'm trying to see the line between which accidental misgendering and deliberate misgendering becomes a traumatic experience versus just a person being insensitive who can be written off as a jerk. I don't know. Honestly, I worry that with the explosion of the word trauma in recent years, we might not only be minimizing certain examples of definite trauma, such as the horrors of war, a violent sexual assault, things of that nature, but we might also be making other people experience incidents as being worse than they otherwise might have perceived them. For example, the difference between saying, "I was bullied at school," versus, "I experienced a lot of significant emotional trauma at school." To me, the latter one sounds worse, and I can see how people being told their bullying experiences were traumatic could make them internalize those situations as worse, more crippling experiences than they might have otherwise viewed them. Similarly, viewing something like misgendering as devastating, traumatic, or even violent, as opposed to just, well, this is a person who is dismissive and disregards my personal state, or something of that nature. Well, I think we can see where that kind of rhetoric has driven this discussion. It's gotten to the point where people are losing their marbles, not just over obvious injustices that ought to be addressed, but over the littlest things as well. And people are afraid to challenge them, or in many ways even express their discomfort over it all, lest they be tarred as hateful bigots. Honestly, even I've been loath to cover this topic for a long time because I knew it was going to be a mess from all sides. I feel like this is one of those topics where you can't please anyone no matter how you address it, so it makes for a very draining, daunting set of videos to write. Pretending like any of this muddled mess is perfectly obvious is totally absurd. Everyone has their own set of ideas on it, and there are a lot of contradictions. So in general, I just urge people to treat others with kindness, keep an open mind in discussion, and stop slinging around words like transphobe for every little thing that people express hesitancy over, because it's just muddying the waters even further. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next one.